наших. Меня зовут Сергей Рыбаков, я программный директор дискуссионного клуба «Восток» и генеральный директор фонда «Природа и люди». Позвольте мне представить наших сегодняшних потрясающих выступающих. Виктория Элис, директор программы по защите дикой природы фонда «Природа и люди». И Александр Шестаков, старший эксперт, Московский государственный университет, Институт морских исследований. Я выучу в конце концов всю эту историю. Ведущий эксперт Российской Федерации на конференции, 16-й конференции сторон Конвенции ООН о биологическом разнообразии. В режиме онлайн к нам присоединится Алексей Голубев, генеральный директор, советник генерального директора Росатом, умные организации, государственная корпорация Росатом, доктор физики и математики. И Надежда Дементьева, представляющая Конвенцию ООН об опустынивании. Итак, давайте начнем с видеоприветствия Надежды Дементьевой. Пожалуйста, внимание на экран.
Dear friends, on behalf of the Executive Secretary of the UNCCD, it is a pleasure for me to address you today from the headquarters of the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the voice for land and drought. Unfortunately, the Executive Secretary is not in Baku right now. We are preparing for our UNCCD COP16, which will be celebrated in Riyadh, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, on the 2nd, 13th December 2024, right after COP29. 2024 will be remembered as Triple COP year, and this is very symbolic. The interlinkages of land degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change are very strong. There are different expressions of one planetary crisis that we, unfortunately, are witnessing right now. In current challenging times for our planet, UNCCD is providing an efficient solution. Land restoration has tremendous potential to help the world limit climate change and achieve its aims for sustainable development. Unfortunately, the current rate of land restoration is not keeping up with the ambitious commitments of the global community to restore 1 billion hectares of degraded land by 2030. Up to 40% of land worldwide is degraded. This means land is losing its ability to support life, crops, and natural ecosystems. We would like to invite you all to contribute to reverse this negative trend, because our health depends on the healthy land, but our land also depends on each of us. COP16 will be a crucial moment when 197 parties to the UN Convention dealing with land and drought will gather to measure the pulse of the planet and think of ways to save it. We invite you to Riyadh to be part of this historic moment. I wish you a successful and productive discussion. Thank you.
Спасибо огромное, Надежда. Вик, у меня большая просьба. Давай поговорим по поводу того, что нас ждет в Риаде, и каким-то мостиком мы вернемся к тому, что у нас уже было в Колумбии.
Добрый день. Большое спасибо, Сергей, за вопрос. I'm a bit puzzled, should I speak English or should I speak Russian, but looking at the audience, I probably should speak Russian now, if it's okay. Ну и продолжая, вернее, отвечая на твой вопрос, Сергей, наверное, я начну с того, что уже сказала Надежда. Удивительный год, 3 конференции сторон, такой своеобразный парад планет для этой осенью, для 3 глобальных конвенций Рио, которые были приняты на саммите Земли в 1992 году и представили такие рамки для спасения человечества, не побоюсь этого слова. То есть это наша повестка устойчивого развития, это наша повестка для сохранения природы во имя устойчивого будущего. Спрашиваете про конвенцию по борьбе с опустыниванием, тому, что будет в Эр-Рияде. Ну, наверное, мы все с надеждой всегда смотрим на все 3 конференции сторон. Очень большие ожидания, огромные ожидания были от конференции сторон в Кали, конвенции по биоразнообразию. Предполагали, что будут приняты знаковые решения. Наверное, Александр скажет о них дополнительно. Я не буду использовать время, которое Александр посвятит этой конференции сторон, тем более, что работали мы вместе. И, ну, я думаю, что Александру есть чем поделиться. Тем не менее, в Кали не удалось эти решения все принять. Надеюсь, что здесь, в Баку и в Эр-Рияде, все получится, и конференции сторон будут закончены. Ожидания от этой конференции сторон КОП-29, на которой очень много народу, очень разная публика, интенсивные переговоры, мы все читаем аналитику, кто-то следит за ходом переговоров, кто-то работает в коридорах на полях. Ожидания огромные, что будут приняты финансовые цели, новые количественные финансовые цели, будут решены важные вопросы, будет операционализировать фонд потери и ущерба. Не будем предвосхищать, посмотрим еще несколько дней впереди. И вот впереди у нас Эр-Рияд, Конвенция ООН по борьбе с опустыниванием, которая формально создана, подписана и реализуется для сухих, засушливых районов, для гумидных, субгумидных районов. Ну, то есть вроде бы не для всех, а тех, которые используют опустынивание, которые испытывают опустынивание, засухи и в первую очередь, наверное, ориентируются на решение этих проблем. Однако уникальная, удивительная, очень важная инициатива в этой конвенции – это нейтральность деградации земель, land degradation neutrality, которая предусматривает использование различных инструментов, различных способов снижения вот этой деградации земель и предотвращения ее дальнейшего развития. И если на сегодняшний день посмотреть на то, что происходит на планете, то порядка 70% всех земель, которые не замерзают постоянно, подвержены деградации. И более 3 миллиардов человек испытывают на себе ее последствия. Сохраняя биологическое разнообразие, предотвращая, смягчая изменения климата, мы так или иначе все равно все исходно связаны с Землей. И подходы, способы, решения, направленные на снижение деградации земель, выход на эту самую нейтральность, которая позволит сохранить экосистемы, позволит применить такие методы хозяйствования, которые обеспечат выполнение экосистемных функций в этих экосистемах. Вот это вызов, и это на самом деле повестка, которая важна и интересна не только для стран, которые в первую очередь входят в мандат конвенции. Очень важно добиться, наверное, того, что, в принципе, сейчас уже и происходит, добиться того, чтобы все страны взяли на себя обязательства по переходу к этой самой нейтральности в деградации земель. Уже порядка 100 стран приняли свои национальные цели, задачи в этой области. И будем надеяться, что процесс пойдет шире. Никто не говорит о том, что надо менять конвенцию. Нужно использовать те лучшие практики, лучшие решения, лучшие инструменты, которые в рамках данной конвенции уже есть и которые могут быть использованы дальше. Чего мы еще можем ждать от Эр-Рияда? Ну, конечно, финансовых решений. Финансовых решений, новых механизмов финансирования, продвижения, справедливого подхода к мобилизации финансовых ресурсов и ответственного их выделения и ответственного использования. Конференция в Эр-Рияде, конференция сторон 16-я, пройдет под девизом «Наша Земля, наше будущее». В этом году на нашем параде планет есть девиз у каждой конференции сторон. И если в Кали это был мир с природой, здесь это солидарность во имя зеленого будущего, то наша Земля, наше будущее, наверное, такой суммирующий девиз, который можно будет использовать и который будет использован на конференции в Эр-Рияде. Но я думаю, что я ответила на ваш вопрос. Думаю, что будут еще вопросы про координацию между конвенциями, хотелось бы поговорить. Но чтобы не занимать очень много времени, может быть, тогда следующий вопрос, а дальше посмотрим, что делать для того, чтобы все 3 были эффективно реализованы.
Перейти сначала к онлайн. Есть у нас Алексей Викторович. Алексей Викторович, есть ли он онлайн? Видим, слышим. Нету. Ну, хорошо. Тогда, Александр Сергеевич, вопрос к вам. Давайте, прежде чем мы перейдем к полемике по поводу двух конференций сторон, скажите, пожалуйста, какие, с вашей точки зрения, были основные моменты, на которых нужно сделать упор по итогам 16-й конференции сторон по биологическому разнообразию? И какие из моментов нужно учесть в Российской Федерации, были учтены, не были учтены, или мы должны на них сосредоточиться?
Спасибо, Сергей, за приглашение. Спасибо, Виктория, за вводную часть. И я думаю, что еще будет у вас возможность сказать чуть больше про как раз связи трех Рио конвенций между собой, как они работают, как друг друга поддерживают, какие есть инструменты координации. Ну, я, наверное, вот скажу несколько слов о том, что, собственно, произошло в Кали, чего не случилось в Кали, и что это может означать для Российской Федерации. Была очень плотная повестка дня, более 30 вопросов. Может быть, из-за того, что она была такой плотной и был целый ряд тяжелых вопросов, не получилось эту конференцию сторон завершить вовремя. Будет вторая часть конференции сторон, вероятно, в первом квартале 2025 года. Но то, что я, наверное, поделю на две части. То, что успели согласовать и о чем успели договориться, и потом то, о чем не успели договориться. Договориться успели о нескольких важных вещах. Я, наверное, не буду останавливаться на некоторых специфических вопросах, например, на вопросах, связанных с дальнейшей работой, например, в области управления ресурсами дикой природы, включая диких видов фауны и флоры. Я вот думаю, Сергей, а не перейти ли нам на
Давай перейдем на английский.
английский язык? So then I will continue in English to address some of our members of the audience. So I was talking about some wildlife management decisions taken at the COP16. So, but also decisions related, for example, to invasive alien species. Invasive alien species, the issue is one of the 5 top problems why we lose biodiversity globally. So together with overexploitation, climate change, pollution, and land use, sea use. So invasive alien species is the 5th most important cause of direct loss of biodiversity, and convention traditionally working on invasive alien species for many years. And this time there is a kind of elements of the program of work, including, for example, elements related to internet trade with invasive alien species, and more control and identification of risks and dealing with risks of invasive alien species. A very important part of discussion was related to marine issues and marine biodiversity, marine, coastal, and island biodiversity, to be exact. And convention adopted 2 important decisions. One related to what we call EPSA in the convention. EPSA stands for ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. Since 2008, convention was working very hard on identifying and describing ecologically or biologically significant marine areas in the global ocean, including, by the way, in the Arctic. In 2014, a good number of EPSAs were delineated in the Arctic Ocean, mostly within the economic zone of the Russian Federation, but also 2 very interesting marine areas in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, and so-called Donut Hole in the central part of the Arctic Ocean. And by 2018, almost the entire global ocean was covered by a set of regional workshops to identify EPSAs. with the exception of Antarctic waters, as they are covered by Antarctic Convention, and the operations there are actually in line with the Antarctic Treaty. And also a number of exclusive economic zones of some countries. Those countries decided not to include the economic zones into consideration under convention, but they did their national exercises. For example, Canada, Japan, Australia, and a number of other countries. The recent discussion, which actually started back to 2016, and for 8 years we were not able to agree on the new modalities, how we can modify the description of those areas, how we can describe new areas, how we probably can exclude some areas from the convention list. And this time we did it. So it was a very significant progress. So now we know for the next period how the global community like to address the issue of ecologically, biologically significant marine areas. And that's very much will affect what will happen in a new international agreement known as BBNJ agreement, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. This agreement under the law of the sea was adopted actually a year ago and expected to come into force maybe in a couple coming years. And this new agreement will deal, among other issues, with the identification and actually establishment of marine protected areas in the open sea. So very interesting, very important decision. Another marine decision relates to cooperation on marine issues, and parties agreed on a number of elements how to proceed with a cooperation on marine biodiversity. As we are sitting here at Climate COP 29, the COP 16 adopted a special decision on biodiversity and climate. And biodiversity and climate decision speaks very much towards the better cooperation between two conventions, between scientific bodies of the convention. Both conventions, they have the so-called SABSTA, subsidiary body on scientific, technical, technological advice in case of biodiversity, and scientific and technical advice in case of CCC. So the better cooperation between them, as well as the better cooperation among the intergovernmental platforms, the scientific intergovernmental platform like IPCC, and in the case of climate, and IBES, which stands for Intergovernmental Scientific Policy Platform for Ecosystem Services and Biodiversity in case of the CBD. So that definitely will bring both conventions much closer to each other, and the interlinkages between biodiversity and climate. And I think many people during this COP were talking about so-called a triple crisis, which includes climate change, but also biodiversity loss. So this cooperation will definitely help to further promote both elements. A standalone and very significant part of the discussion under CBD was the issue of so-called Article 8J. Article 8J of the convention speaks on all issues related to indigenous peoples and local communities, including traditional knowledge and use of traditional knowledge, conservation of traditional knowledge. And I would like to highlight, there were several decisions there. For example, the decision on traditional languages and indigenous languages, or for example, a decision related to recognition of the UN Forum on Indigenous Peoples, etc. But I like to stress two, or actually even three decisions. One, it's adoption of the new program of work until 2030 on Article 8J, so all provisions related to indigenous peoples and local communities. It's again significant step forward, and for the next 5-6 years determines what convention will do on the issues of indigenous peoples, local communities. And the second decision, convention established new permanent subsidiary body on Article 8J. And there is a belief that this specialized body will give much more opportunities for indigenous people, local communities to be fully integrated into the work of convention, have better access to negotiations, have their own area where they can discuss all issues related to indigenous peoples, local communities. And CBD compared to climate convention is way much more advanced in incorporating those groups into negotiation process actually and discussions. So that was considered as a very significant step and actually a big victory for indigenous peoples and local communities globally, and was very much celebrated at the Conference of the Parties, very much supported also by the presidency, Colombia. And another decision maybe specific for some group of countries, but the proposal was made by the government of Colombia together with the government of Brazil, a special decision to recognize the role of Afro-descendants in communities of those countries, and in many communities among South American and Latin American countries into conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in those countries. So that was a significant step forward. Another standalone area, standalone in a way, because it's considered super politically intense in terms of negotiations, was an issue of so-called DSI. DSI stands for Digital Sequence Information. And digital sequence information relates to the use of genetic resources of biodiversity globally, but not just use and access to genetic resources, but very much towards the fair and equitable share of benefits arising from the use of biodiversity and use of genetic resources. Very contentious issue, super politicized, because it's a question how big businesses, not only big businesses, any businesses using genetic resources, and we know that significant part of pharmaceuticals, significant part of cosmetics, significant part of agriculture, all biotechnology, they all use genetic resources. And the decision was very significant because decision established the international mechanism to ensure the share of benefits from those resources, actually classifying companies into small, medium, and large companies, and all those companies are supposed to pay a certain share of their profit into specially established fund for genetic resources, and this fund will be one of the sources for biodiversity conservation, sustainable use in developing countries. Very significant decision. We definitely will see how that will work in the future. And as Sergey, you asked me also, what does it mean for our country? For our country, that's supposed to mean a lot, but our country did nothing to follow those negotiations. Unfortunately, is not present on these particular agenda items. And there is no ongoing discussion nationally on what to do with that. So that, of course, can pose certain risk that our companies dealing with genetic resources, our companies from biotechnology sphere, will face probably some not very pleasant surprises when this mechanism probably will be in place. So definitely the advice will be to pay very significant attention to those developments in the convention, and at further stages to really follow this agenda item. I was talking about those areas where we got some decisions. There are some more of them, for example, biodiversity and health. And convention adopted the multi-year program of work on biodiversity and health. First of all, building on WTO, not WTO, but of course World Health Organization, WHO, together with UNEP and a few other organizations. Following the COVID pandemics, they developed a new concept known as One Health approach. One Health approach combined together the elements related to biodiversity, biodiversity loss, degradation, fragmentation of ecosystems, and the influence on health. First of all, pandemics, and we know that will be many further pandemics, and the linkages between the health and biodiversity. And we have now the program for the next probably about 10 years to follow. What didn't happen? Several agenda items, super important agenda items. I will start maybe, I don't want to say not important, they're very important, but maybe from a little bit smaller to a higher in the agenda of discussion. So 2022 was an important year for biodiversity because Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was developed and agreed at the convention. And although it was agreed under the convention, this is a global framework for all and for all UN system, but also for civil society, academia, business, and it was fully recognized as such by the General Assembly in 2023. So one topic we discussed was how to further develop the system of indicators, both for biodiversity, but also indicators for assessing the success and monitor the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. And the related topics were how to organize this monitoring, how to organize planning for implementation, including the issue of national biodiversity and action plans, so-called NBSAPs. Each party to the convention is supposed to develop their NBSAP. Russian Federation submitted actually the first day of COP16, the national targets. Everyone can come now to the website of the convention and find 24 national targets on biodiversity, which actually agreed national targets agreed by many ministries and a number of scientific organizations. But Russia still has a task to develop the national strategy and action plan. And the commitment is that this national strategy and action plan to be developed by the end of 2025. Another point was how to agree on reporting. By 2030, all countries will need to report twice on their progress towards the global biodiversity framework, but also their progress on national strategies and action plans. That was a very complicated discussion, and parties still did not reach a full agreement on that, including on monitoring system, including, for example, the role of non-state actors and how non-state actors, whether it's NGOs or business, can really contribute to the national targets, but also global biodiversity targets. And of course, the most contentious issue was a financial issue. At some sessions earlier today, we discussed the financial elements for conventions. And of course, the financial element for the CBD was also very much important. Global Biodiversity Framework adopted the target 19, where $200 billion to be mobilized every year for biodiversity. And the discussion at COP16 was how we can do that. What will be the resource mobilization strategy? Resource mobilization strategy was almost agreed, but not adopted, as was no time to do that. We also had a long discussion about the financial mechanism of the convention, the current financial mechanism, Global Environmental Facility. Many parties, first of all, of course, developing parties, they have significant issues about operation of this fund, very complex procedures, the governance of Global Environmental Fund facility is not really reflecting the realities, the current realities, with the dominance of developed countries, while actually the money is supposed to come to developing countries and all work on biodiversity is supposed to happen in developing countries, many other issues. So very difficult discussion. But the most difficult one was the issue of establishing a standalone separate fund for biodiversity, global fund for biodiversity, where developing countries since 2022 at the COP15, they expected this fund to be established. That's never happened. And now they insist the fund to be established, and developed countries will provide substantial amount of money coming from the public source. First of all, the official development aid, ODA, but also the fund, which will be open for any other sources of funding, whether we are talking about business or we are talking about bilateral relations or we are talking from philanthropists or NGOs. So the flow of money should come to this fund, including what I said before, the money coming from the use and utilization of genetic resources. There is a strong opposition to the fund from developed countries, so this issue was not resolved and will continue to be part of the discussion. Interestingly, another element which was not discussed, was not completed, is an issue of cooperation between CBD and other international instruments and conventions, including CCD, including CITES, including number of other instruments. Here, I hope it was not that much contentious, but simply no time to complete this agenda item. So just to conclude for the Russian Federation, from my perspective, the priority will be implementation of those decisions taking there, whether we are talking about climate change and biodiversity, or we are talking about One Health approach, or we are talking about invasive alien species. Of course, the marine issue will be also important, but I already said that following the DSI discussion will be extremely important for the country. And I didn't touch upon a couple other issues which are very often set aside. The COP16 was not just COP16. COP16 was a triple meeting. It was COP16 of the CBD. It was COP10 of the protocol on biosafety, known as Cartagena Protocol, and it was COP4 for the protocol on genetic resources, so-called Nagoya Protocol. So that's two protocols where Russian Federation is not party to. And even if we are not party to those protocols, we need to follow those protocols to understand some risks and opportunities arising from those protocols. And I hope that in the future COPs and COP MOPs, the Russian Federation will be present at least as an observer to see what's going on there. So stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Vika, question. Sorry. Can you please try to find some linkage between all these three planets, between these three different conventions, meaning biological diversity that we said, the current one that we are here on climate, and the upcoming one on desertification?
Thank you, Sergey. Actually, Alexander already started pointing out on one of the decisions of the CBD of COP16, which was not taken, on the better cooperation and interlinkages between conventions. But from the very beginning, these three global treaties are very much connected, or have to be, must be connected and interconnected, because they all bring together various aspects of the way to the harmony, people with harmony, in living in harmony with nature. So basically, addressing global biodiversity loss under the climate change and land degradation caused by climate change, which also supports biodiversity survival. This is kind of circle that would definitely be possible to implement in terms of decisions to be implemented and the ways forward, only in a way if those things are absolutely closely linked, if cooperation, better understanding, and synergies are ensured. And as we are looking in historical aspect, in historical scale, back in 2001, a joint liaison group was established for better coordination between conventions, better information gathering, and connections. And actually, all representatives of all subsidiary bodies, as well as secretariats, take part in the liaison group. I think in terms of information, it plays a significant role. What is missing, in a way, is stronger implementation both at international and national levels, better connections and cross-sectoral cooperation, and implementation, informed implementation of products of these conventions. What I would like to stress today is that discussing international negotiations and decisions taking, we always should think and do think about national implementation. What are the products of these conventions at national levels? For CBD, as Alexander already mentioned, this is NBSAPs that will and must be designed or redesigned, if you like, in accordance with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is absolutely cross-sectoral, which involves contributions from businesses, science, various sectors. It's not purely biodiversity conservation. It's management, it's resource mobilization, it's implementation of various programs and plans that contribute to biodiversity conservation and sustainable management. So NBSAPs are now under development. Those ambitious goals and objectives. Many countries already presented, if not strategies, but at least their national goals. Some are still in the process of their development, and NBSAPs should be formulated and very soon submitted, as was already mentioned earlier. Another product of the UN CCC is national action plans for adaptation. Again, to ensure adaptation, one cannot work in the empty universe. So various aspects on cross-sectoral manner have to be addressed, and it involves contribution of various sectors of economy, stakeholder contributions, best available science as a background for the development, and of course financial commitments similar to NBSAPs. They will not be realized without a contribution and adequate resourcing. There are also national action plans to combat desertification towards the land neutrality in the Convention to combat desertification. And again, similar way. What can be done? What should be done? I'm pretty sure, I'm convinced that those programs will be successfully implemented if developed, monitored, and implemented in coordination. So it's not enough to have joint liaison group for the conventions. There should be national bodies, national whatever, working groups, or what kind of form would be acceptable for the country, but relevantly represented agencies and stakeholders have to be involved in this in the work of this coordination mechanism at national level, and only in a way when concrete, resourced, measurable action will be implemented at national level, we could come further to international one and achieve better results. But of course, such things like two important platforms, IPCC and IPBES, if developing background based on best knowledge and available information, they should coordinate and they should work together. That was also discussed in a way in Cali at COP16, that we need to avoid duplication, not only for the platforms, but also for various programs and initiatives under the conventions. Looking at land degradation and neutrality, basically all our successes on addressing climate change, all our successes on biodiversity would contribute to the land degradation neutrality, and vice versa. Sustainable agricultural practices, involvement of new technologies and new and best knowledge would contribute to the better results in these two other conventions. So to summarize, it's easy to say that everyone will coordinate or should coordinate to everyone. In reality, there is in details, and the way how this will be organized both at global and very importantly at national levels and translated further to local levels, how much stakeholders, private sector, science, all interested parties would contribute and understand what is there. That would, in result, bring the success for both, for all three areas of our sustainability agenda. And once again, speaking about each of those areas, we should keep in mind global scale, national scale, and local scale. This is nothing new, but it's always important and I think useful to reiterate this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alexander, one more question, and if you can make it brief. So as far as out of 3 conventions, we got only one that been finished, or going to be a next step, as you said, next year, beginning of next year. Can you just explain what will be the next events, if I may put it like this, between the conference of parties that was in Colombia until the next one? So what are the main discussion points where we can try to present the position of our country and try to understand what can be done next?
I don't think that there will be any other meetings before the decision on COP16 Part 2. So because we had a very extensive discussions during COP16, for example, on resource mobilization, including establishing the fund. We had 9 sessions of the contact group, each session from 3 to 4 hours. So it was a very extensive negotiations there. And we have a document left at a certain point. I don't think that parties will have any further discussion on this document before coming in person to complete these negotiations. There are, of course, always some ideas that the negotiations can be completed online, but there are many parties, for example, all African countries are completely against the option for online negotiations, only in person. So I don't think we will have any further sessions or discussions before. Secretariat may organize few online informal meetings to further discuss before we come. When we come and where we come, we don't know. That can be Montreal, that can be Nairobi, that can be Bangkok. So we don't know yet. What also need to be done, which is a little bit outside decisions, a small technical issue, but the budget of the convention was not approved. So technically speaking, from the 1st of January, the secretariat of this convention is not operational unless the budget is approved. So the budget can be approved through so-called silence procedure, when all parties may agree, hopefully, on the budget. So that's why I don't expect any events or any serious formal discussions before Part 2. But then, of course, we need to be prepared for the next intersessional period until COP17 in Yerevan in 2026. So that will be, of course, the meetings of now 3 permanent subsidiary bodies, the SABSTA, subsidiary body on implementation, and a newly established subsidiary body on AJ. But that's all will happen in the course of 25 and 26.
Thank you. The Convention of Biological Diversity is a trendsetter, if I may put it like this. It's the only convention that got its goals until 2050, if I'm right. So no one else got it that long. So we'll see how that goes. We're going to follow what's going on with the Convention on Biological Diversity. We're going to see the results of this conference of the parties on climate change. And we're definitely going to follow the ideas and things that we expect to happen in Riyadh on desertification. If I may, any questions from the audience, so our speakers can answer. So please raise your hand and you will have a mic. Unless we're good, let's applause and thank our fantastic, magnificent speakers and our audience for being here today. And I wish you a fruitful continuation for 29th Conference of the Parties on the UN Convention on Climate Change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. And we are also expecting good results from this COP. All are waiting in anticipation.